No breath equals death. There we go. So it makes sense that we pay a lot of attention to the respiratory cycles of our clients. We've already been talking about that. We addressed this earlier. People may be breathing wrong, but they're still alive, right? So what's the big deal? Well, come on. Right. Poor respiration essentially changes your blood gas profile. Right, so a lot of people talk about the idea of greens drinks and so on, right? Take these greens drinks, they help alkalize your blood. That is actually bullshit. No foods that you eat alkalize your blood. No green diet alkalizes your blood, right? Oxygen is the primary thing that determines whether your blood is going to be acid or alkaline, not the foods that you eat. You can eat a completely alkaline diet and still have an acidic blood gas profile. Right, because it's to do with the rate and depth of respiration that controls that factor. Okay, not just what you ate. Right, so there's a big part of this. It doesn't mean that kind of I'm saying now go and eat really acidic foods and just breathe really well. Like it's still good to have these other agents in the body, but not for the story we've been told. Not for that reason. Okay, so poor respiration changes your blood gas profile, which is actually an issue because that effectively alters your acid-alkaline balance within your bloodstream. Remember, acids themselves are pro-inflammatory, right? So the more acidic our bloodstream gets, the more chance we've got of not digesting our foods correctly, like the foods that we're consuming, but also increasing inflammation and irritation to any injuries that you may have, but also just nerves and tissues in themselves. The more acidic your bloodstream is, the more tissue irritation you're going to receive. Okay. Poor respiration also destabilizes the low back. I already told you, right? So the diaphragm ties in to down at the L3, L4 level, right? And it's a lower back stabilizer. Well, if I'm not breathing correctly, that means I'm not contracting a muscle that's responsible for lower back stability in itself. That is increased threat. So a lot of back pain itself is actually coming from nothing more than a signal from your brain saying, hey, you're not breathing right. It's an opportunity for you to breathe right. That's the very first thing I come to with my clients anyway. It's the very first thing that any client gets taught in my studio, how to breathe. It's the very first thing we do in every session, breathe. Very last thing we do in every session, breathe, right? If I see them losing technique or anything during a session, we come back to breathing first and foremost. But not stretch this, poke this, twiddle that. Look at me moving the pen back and forward. It's always breathing, right? Because most of the physical distress that they're under can actually be solved by breathing, believe it or not. Okay, but particularly when it comes to back stability, yeah. It's the concept of change, but it's also for a lot of people just becoming conscious of what is normally an unconscious activity is sometimes threatening as well, right? Like trying it, like. I've had clients who become slightly anxious when you get them to focus on their heartbeat, right? Kind of like try and monitor and focus on your heart, and then suddenly is that beating in pattern? Is it in rhythm? Is it strong enough? Is it weak enough? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? Right? Because you remember what I said about anxiety, increased awareness, right? So it's natural sometimes when you increase awareness, a person, as soon as the awareness is increased, they're like, oh, it's not right, and they become more threatened. We just hate them, right? No, we don't. That was just a pattern interrupter. There are lots of different mechanisms for asthma. So for some people, it's related to the bronchi themselves and the muscle surrounding that, right? Other people, it's an alveolar problem. So I don't know if you know much about the makeup of the lung, but a lung itself is it's almost like the best analogy I can give you is like bubble wrap, right? Kind of each bubble is one of the alveoli, and sometimes there's too much inflammation on the alveoli, so they can't fully inflate. But for a lot of us, our asthma kind of lives in this area. It's more of a bronchial thing, right? Again, there are actual medical reasons for it, but there are also threat-based reasons, like the more acidic you are, for example, the more likely you are to inflame those tissues that are all red. Because some of us, this is congenital, right? For some people, this is just congenital. Other people, it's like if you live in a highly polluted area, then the pollutants are irritating you, right? But you'll find actually that the more the more you live a lifestyle that kind of sends your body acidic, the more likely you are to feel the negative effects of things like asthma. Right? So in other words, a high-stress lifestyle is going to give you more of the feelings of asthma as opposed to a low-stress, low-threat. Right? It's interesting, actually, because so many asthmatics don't do any breathing exercises. Right? They're already terrified of their breathing and they don't like to do anything with it until they go into an anxiety attack, and then the first thing we do is give them a brown paper bag and have them breathe in the bag. Right? But most asthmatics would do themselves the world of good from lots of different levels, right? From the changing their blood gas levels, their acid alkaline levels, and from retraining their respiratory muscles just to be more efficient and effective, a lot of their threat would actually disappear. It's unfortunate that the only exercise that most asthmatics generally tend to do for actually directly affecting their asthma is this. That's it. That's where most asthmatics actually leave their, I need to deal with my asthma problem. They need something very different. Poor respiration in itself creates faulty movement patterns. Right? If you're hyperventilating, hypoventilating, holding your breath, doing any of those things when you're not supposed to be, you're going to move differently. Right? You are definitely going to move differently. Stand up for me. However you breathe, like if you already are a diaphragmatic breather, do that. But if not, just breathe in your most natural way that you possibly can for a second. Just your most natural, like how you normally breathe. Just get an idea for what your breathing cycle is like. Okay. Now drop into a kind of a slumped posture. Drop into poor posture. There we go. Right. And obviously we're over accentuating it. Yeah. Hey, Bob. Right. Okay, now try and do the same breath that you just tried to do a second ago from that posture. Now try and do a deep diaphragmatic breath from that posture. Right, I think you get the picture, right? Now stand up nice and tall. Stand up really tall. Take your first breath from an accentuated good posture, like the first style of breathing that you did. And now take a deep diaphragmatic breath from that tall posture. Big belly breathing. Good. Once you're done, take a seat. Structure determines function, guys, right? Whenever you change a person's structure, you change a person's function. Like telling a person that they need to practice breathing, but without giving them the tools to get themselves in the correct alignment to breathe is rarely going to work. Okay, but it's a negative feedback loop. Structure determines function, but function often determines structure. Right? So how you're currently functioning is kind of going to affect how your kind of structure pans out as well. It's a two-way loop. Right? We've got to start thinking with our clients about how we can actually use respiratory cues to hold them in better posture, in better alignment, and actually use their respiration as the indicator of whether a set should start or stop for a lot of them. Okay? Are they still breathing the way I've instructed them to breathe? As soon as they stop breathing that way, and it's not a case of you should always be breathing diaphragmatically. That's not the case. Right? The heavier the load, the more you're going to shift into upper respiratory tract breathing. But if we're under light load, and they can't maintain the breathing cycle, it makes sense to actually lighten the load even further, weirdly enough, right? And then if you do that, you get them breathing correctly, you'll find that they can actually suddenly take on heightened loads again. Poor respiration leads to pain, ischemia, trigger points, right? What's ischemia? Yeah, lack of blood flow to an area, right? Kind of areas of ischemia are areas that have reduced blood flow. And that's reduced blood flow is essentially a sign of reduced neurology to that area. Because if you had full nerve conductivity to an area, your brain would still know it exists. Hey, I know that the mid-back area exists, therefore I'll shunt some blood into that area. When you start to see a reduced blood flow, very often it's the case of the brain saying, I don't kind of know where you are. So if I don't know where you are, why would I shunt blood there? Right? So this ischemia and these trigger points are often actually nothing more than a trigger for neurological blindness for an area. Make sense? Okay, alters digestion again, because if I'm under threat style breathing, I've moved into the sympathetic branch of my nervous system. As I move into the sympathetic branch of my nervous system, sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest, that goes down. So now any foods that I'm consuming while I'm under threat and breathing poorly and everything else are actually not being digested in the way they're supposed to be digested. And in fact, they may not get digested at all. They're just sitting there, right? Sitting there in the digestive tract doing very little. So you can be in a high quality diet, but with poor respiration, you may not be getting all the nutrients out of it. Again, one of the things that we discussed in BodyMAP 2 was the idea that if you haven't got the time or the inclination to sit down, be with your meal and actually prepare yourself for eating, you probably shouldn't eat at all, right? Not eating on the go, not multitasking, not grabbing a quick sandwich in between clients and all the rest of it, but actually saying, if I can't sit down and actually be with the food I'm consuming and prepare myself for it, it's probably best that I don't consume it, right? Because otherwise it's actually going into the digestive tract and not being used. Parasympathetic has gone on a go slow, and sympathetic is in heightened alertness. So if I know that I have to be parasympathetic to digest nutrients, why would I keep throwing nutrition into my body when I'm not doing that because I'm in the wrong branch of my nervous system? But that's exactly what we do. Eat 6 times a day regardless of where you are, what you're doing, what's going on in your life, how under stress you are or whatever. A lot of us are actually eating while we're seriously under stress. The example I gave last week was cortisol soup. It's like we're eating every meal with a bowl of cortisol soup. Right, we all know how harmful cortisol is to our bodies, but we're essentially sitting down and eating while we're stressed and eating a bowl of cortisol soup. Well, respiration is one of the key tools to make sure that you say no to the waiter that's bringing you the cortisol soup. Right? Big, deep breaths, diaphragmatic breathing is a way for you to tell your nervous system all is safe, all is fine, all's good in the world. The waiter goes, okay, you don't need the cortisol soup now. As you go to consume foods, your body actually gives you the nutrients that you're supposed to be getting from them. Remember, I know this sounds obvious, guys, but food is simply a vehicle for nutrient delivery. That's all it is, right? Your body is saying, I need the nutrients from the food. I don't need the food in itself. I need the nutrients in it, right? And that sounds obvious, but given that it needs the nutrients in it, we need to do everything in our power to actually think about, is the person I am at this moment able to extract the nutrients in that food? Very likely you're not, okay? Not as effectively as you could be. Okay, so from that perspective, all respiratory dysfunction, all faulty breathing is in itself a threat, and it is the highest of all of the threat hierarchy. So